HOA demanded I face the cops, believing I was just another homeowner. But the sheriff recognized my SEAL team's past and revealed the truth behind the quiet man they underestimated. Welcome back, everyone. Before today's story begins, I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. If this is your first time on the channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll always know when a new story is released. Your support means more than you know. Every like, comment, and subscription helps this channel grow and allows us to keep sharing incredible stories with viewers around the world. And before we begin, tell me this: where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. Now, grab a comfortable seat, relax, and let's dive into today's unforgettable story. The sheriff stepped out of his vehicle expecting to handle a neighborhood dispute, but the moment he looked at me, everything changed. He didn't see a problem homeowner. He saw someone he never expected to meet again. The morning air was cold as I stood in front of my house at Pine Valley Estates, listening to the sound of police radios and the quiet whispers of my neighbors behind me. The HOA president, Evelyn Harrington, stood a few feet away with a confident smile, holding the same clipboard she carried everywhere. She looked like someone who had already decided how this story would end. "Call the cops," she told me. "Let them explain the rules to you." She said it calmly, almost proudly, like those words were the final move in a game she was certain she had already won. What Evelyn didn't know was that the person she was trying to intimidate had spent years facing situations far more serious than an HOA argument. But I never told her that. I never wanted anyone's respect because of a title from my past. I wanted people to judge me by the person I was now. My name is Jackson Reid, and before that morning, I had spent years trying to live a quiet life. After leaving the SEAL teams, I didn't want attention. I didn't want people asking questions about where I had been or what I had done. I wanted simple things: a peaceful home, a small yard, time with my family, a normal routine. Pine Valley Estates seemed like the perfect place for that. The neighborhood was quiet. The streets were clean. People waved when they passed each other. For a while, it felt like I had finally found the calm I was searching for. Then Evelyn became president of the HOA. At first, I didn't think much about her. Every community has someone who enjoys organizing things. Rules can be useful when they help people live together. I followed them. I maintained my property. I respected my neighbors. I had no interest in conflict. But Evelyn didn't just want organization. She wanted control. She walked through the neighborhood inspecting everything with her clipboard in hand, looking for anything she could correct. A fence slightly different from her preference. A decoration she didn't approve of. A driveway that didn't match her idea of perfection. She called it maintaining standards. Others started calling it something else. The first time she came to my house, she stood near my driveway and looked around carefully. "Jackson," she said, "we need residents to understand that this community has expectations." Her tone was polite, but there was something underneath it. She wasn't asking. She was informing me. I asked her what specifically was wrong. She pointed toward my property line and mentioned a minor issue with a storage area that had never bothered anyone before. I listened. I nodded. I fixed what actually needed fixing. But that wasn't enough for Evelyn. She wanted compliance, not cooperation. Over the next few weeks, I noticed the pattern. Every conversation ended the same way. Evelyn expected people to agree because she believed her position gave her the final word. She didn't know about my military background. She didn't know the discipline I learned during years of service. She only saw a quiet homeowner who didn't argue. And that was her mistake. Because silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it means someone is choosing patience. And Evelyn was about to discover that the quietest person in the neighborhood was the one she should have understood before challenging. The biggest mistake Evelyn Harrington made was assuming that a quiet person had nothing worth protecting. She saw my silence as surrender. She saw my patience as weakness. What she never understood was that discipline teaches you something important. Not every battle deserves an immediate reaction. Sometimes the strongest move is waiting until the truth has nowhere left to hide. Before Evelyn became HOA president, Pine Valley Estates was just a normal neighborhood. People took care of their homes, greeted each other on the sidewalks, and handled small disagreements like neighbors usually do. There were rules, but they existed to keep things organized, not to give one person control over everyone else. That changed when Evelyn took over. She arrived with new ideas about how the community should operate. At first, many residents supported her. She spoke confidently about improving property values and creating a more organized environment. She knew exactly how to make control sound like responsibility. But slowly, the changes started becoming less about improving the neighborhood and more about making sure everyone followed her personal expectations. I noticed it first when she began sending notices for small things that had never been a problem before. A mailbox placed slightly differently. A garden arrangement she considered unacceptable. A storage item that she claimed affected the appearance of the community. Each notice was written professionally, but the message behind them was always the same. Do what Evelyn says. The first serious disagreement between us happened over a small section of my property near the side of my house. Evelyn claimed it violated HOA guidelines and needed to be changed immediately. I reviewed the rules carefully and realized the situation was not as simple as she presented it. I wasn't refusing to cooperate. I was asking for clarification. That was something Evelyn didn't like. Jackson, this community works because people respect the decisions being made, she told me. Her words sounded reasonable, but I understood what she was really saying. She didn't want a conversation. She wanted agreement. I calmly explained my position and offered to discuss a solution. Instead of responding, she looked at me with the same expression I had seen before. The expression of someone who believed the outcome was already decided. After that day, things changed. The notices became more frequent. The conversations became colder. Evelyn started mentioning consequences instead of solutions. She talked about fines. She talked about enforcement. She talked about involving outside authorities if necessary. I listened quietly. I didn't threaten her. I didn't raise my voice. I simply kept records. Every notice, every email, every conversation. That habit came from years of training where details mattered. In my previous life, overlooking a small detail could create serious consequences. Accuracy wasn't optional. Preparation wasn't optional. I carried that mindset into everything I did. But Evelyn didn't know that. She didn't know the person she was trying to pressure had spent years preparing for situations where staying calm mattered. She only saw what was in front of her. A man living quietly. A neighbor who didn't argue. Someone she believed she could push until he gave in. Then one afternoon, she crossed a line. She arrived at my house with another HOA board member and accused me of refusing to comply with community rules. She spoke loudly enough that neighbors nearby could hear. She wanted an audience. She wanted me to react. But I didn't give her the moment she wanted. I simply asked one question. Can you show me where the rule gives the HOA that authority? For the first time, Evelyn didn't have an immediate answer. She looked down at her clipboard, then back at me. It was only a brief pause, but it revealed something important. Evelyn was used to people accepting her words. She wasn't used to someone calmly asking for proof. And from that moment forward, our disagreement became something much bigger than a simple HOA complaint. The moment I realized Evelyn Harrington was no longer interested in solving a problem was the moment I stopped seeing her actions as ordinary HOA disagreements. This wasn't about a mailbox, a storage area, or a neighborhood rule anymore. It was about someone believing that a position gave them the right to control people who never gave them that power. After our conversation outside my house, Evelyn changed her approach. She stopped trying to convince me and started trying to pressure me. The notices became more serious. The language became more aggressive. She began using phrases like failure to comply and community enforcement action. To anyone reading those letters quickly, they looked official. That was exactly what she wanted. She wanted people to feel like her words carried the weight of law. But I knew something Evelyn didn't. A document only has power when the person issuing it actually has the authority to issue it. I had learned that lesson many times during my years in the military. Confidence without preparation means nothing. A person can sound certain and still be completely wrong. I started organizing everything. Every letter she sent, every email, every conversation where she suggested consequences without explaining the actual rule behind them. I wasn't doing it because I wanted to fight. I was doing it because I understood something important. When someone builds their power on intimidation, the best response is clarity. Let the facts speak. Around that time, some of my neighbors began approaching me privately. They didn't want to make a scene, but they wanted to talk. One homeowner told me Evelyn had pressured her over a small landscaping decision. Another mentioned receiving warnings that felt unnecessary and excessive. Slowly, I realized my situation wasn't unique. Evelyn had created a pattern. She found small issues, presented them as major violations, and waited for people to stop questioning her. Most people didn't fight because they didn't want the stress. They just wanted peace. I understood that. Peace is valuable. But there is a difference between avoiding conflict and allowing someone to misuse authority. I had spent years following orders, respecting leadership, and working within systems where responsibility mattered. That experience taught me something. Good leaders don't demand respect. They earn it. Evelyn seemed to believe respect came automatically with a title. The more she pushed, the more obvious that became. Then came the day she decided to involve the HOA board officially. She scheduled a meeting and presented my situation as if I was a difficult resident refusing to cooperate. She spoke about protecting community standards. She talked about setting an example. She carefully avoided mentioning the fact that I had repeatedly asked for the specific authority behind her claims. During the meeting, I sat quietly and listened. I watched the way she spoke. The confidence, the certainty, the assumption that everyone in the room would simply agree. When it was my turn, I didn't make accusations. I didn't attack her character. I placed my notes on the table and asked a simple question. Can someone show me the exact HOA provision that gives this board the authority to enforce this demand? The room became quiet. For the first time, Evelyn's confidence seemed to slow down. She looked through her papers, searching for an answer that wasn't immediately available. That moment confirmed what I had already suspected. Her power depended on people never asking for proof. But I had asked. And once someone asks the right question, the entire story can change. The silence after I asked for proof was the first sign that Evelyn Harrington's confidence was beginning to crack. She had spent months speaking as if every decision she made was automatically correct. She expected people to listen because she was the HOA president. She expected a title to be enough. But when someone calmly asks for the foundation behind that authority, confidence alone is not enough anymore. After that meeting, I thought Evelyn might finally step back. I thought maybe seeing the questions from the board and the hesitation from some neighbors would make her reconsider. I was wrong. Instead of slowing down, she decided to escalate. A few days later, I received a new letter from the HOA. This one was different. The tone was no longer about cooperation. It was about consequences. The letter claimed I had continued to ignore community standards and that further action would be taken if I did not comply. I read it carefully at my kitchen table while the afternoon sunlight came through the windows. The room was quiet except for the sound of the paper moving in my hands. I wasn't angry. I had learned a long time ago that emotions can make people careless. I simply placed the letter next to the others and added it to the growing record. Every action Evelyn took was creating the evidence she didn't realize she was building. That was the irony of the situation. She believed she was strengthening her position, but every new notice showed the same pattern. Pressure without proof. Authority without foundation. Around that time, more neighbors started sharing their experiences with me. They didn't come to me because they wanted conflict. They came because they were tired of feeling like they were the only ones questioning what was happening. One neighbor told me Evelyn had threatened fines over a minor issue that had never been a problem before. Another said she avoided speaking at HOA meetings because she felt her concerns would simply be dismissed. Listening to those stories reminded me of something I had seen many times throughout my service. The most dangerous situations are not always created by loud people. Sometimes they are created when people stop speaking up. Silence can protect peace, but silence can also allow problems to grow. I knew I couldn't let that happen. Still, I had no desire to reveal my past or use my military service as leverage. My years in the SEAL teams were not a badge I carried around to impress people. They were a chapter of my life that taught me discipline, responsibility, and humility. I had no interest in telling Evelyn who I was. If she judged me based on how I lived now, that was her choice. The truth would eventually speak for itself. Then one evening, Evelyn made the decision that changed everything. She arrived at my house with 2 HOA representatives and stood at the end of my driveway. The sun was setting behind the neighborhood trees, casting long shadows across the road. She looked completely confident. "Jackson, this has gone on long enough," she said. "You've left us no choice." I already knew what she meant. She wasn't there to discuss a solution. She was there to announce her next move. "We're going to involve law enforcement," she said. For a moment, the air felt completely still. My neighbors watching from their windows didn't know what would happen next. Evelyn believed those words would finally force me to surrender. She believed calling the police would prove she had been right all along. But she didn't understand one thing. Some people stay quiet because they are powerless. Others stay quiet because they know exactly when the truth needs to speak. The moment Evelyn Harrington said she was calling law enforcement, I knew the situation had reached a completely different level. For weeks, she had relied on pressure, paperwork, and the assumption that people would simply follow her instructions. Now she believed the presence of a police officer would give her the final advantage. What she didn't understand was that bringing in someone with real authority was the worst decision she could make. That night, after she left my driveway, I went inside and looked over everything I had collected. The letters, the emails, the meeting notes. Every piece of the story was there. I placed each document in order, not because I wanted to prove myself to Evelyn, but because I knew facts mattered when emotions took over. The next morning, I received confirmation that a sheriff's deputy would be coming to discuss the complaint. I sat at my kitchen table for a few minutes, looking out at the quiet street. I thought about how strange it was that a simple disagreement had turned into something much bigger. I had spent my life avoiding attention. Now I was about to have my past connected to a situation I never wanted. But I also knew something important. I wasn't ashamed of where I came from. I just never wanted my service to be the reason people treated me differently. After leaving the SEAL teams, I made a promise to myself. I would build a normal life. I would be judged by my actions today, not by stories from yesterday. That was why I never mentioned my military background when Evelyn challenged me. I didn't want respect because of a uniform I no longer wore. I wanted respect because I treated people the right way. Later that afternoon, my neighbor Mark stopped by. He stood near the porch, looking toward the street before speaking. "Jackson, are you sure you're okay with this?" he asked. I smiled and told him I was. He looked uncertain. "Evelyn thinks she has this figured out." I looked toward my house and then back at him. "She thinks that because nobody has challenged her before." That was the difference. Evelyn had spent years creating an environment where people avoided conflict. But avoiding conflict and accepting unfair treatment were two different things. The following morning, the sheriff's vehicle arrived at Pine Valley Estates. The sound of the engine immediately drew attention from neighbors watching through their windows. Evelyn was already outside waiting. She looked completely confident, standing beside her paperwork like she was presenting evidence in a courtroom. When the sheriff stepped out, she approached him first. "Thank you for coming," she said. "This resident has repeatedly refused to follow HOA rules." The sheriff listened politely. He looked through the documents she handed him, then glanced toward me. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then his expression changed. It was subtle, but I noticed it. His eyes narrowed slightly. He looked at me again, almost like he was confirming something he couldn't believe. "Jackson Reid?" he asked. The entire street went quiet. I hadn't heard that tone in years. It wasn't the tone of someone responding to a complaint. It was the tone of someone recognizing a name from another chapter of life. Evelyn looked confused. She turned toward the sheriff, then back at me. And in that moment, I knew something she never expected was about to come to light. The street became completely silent when the sheriff said my name. For a moment, nobody moved. Evelyn Harrington looked from him to me, trying to understand why a simple HOA complaint had suddenly changed direction. She had expected a routine conversation. She expected the sheriff to hear her side, look at my property, and confirm that she had the authority she always claimed to have. But that was not what happened. Sheriff Daniel Crawford looked at me carefully before asking, "Jackson Reid, is that really you?" I nodded. I hadn't heard someone say my full name like that in years. Not since my time in the military. Not since I was surrounded by people who knew me for a completely different reason. Evelyn stood there holding her paperwork, confused and frustrated. She had prepared for an argument about HOA rules. She had not prepared for the possibility that the person she was trying to intimidate had a history she never bothered to understand. "You know him?" she asked. Daniel looked at her, then back at me. "Yes," he said. "I know exactly who he is." The neighbors watching from their homes had no idea what was happening. Neither did Evelyn. She had spent so much time focusing on my quiet personality that she never considered there was more to my story. The truth was, I never wanted my past to become part of this situation. My years with the SEAL teams were not something I used to gain influence. They were not something I mentioned during disagreements. They were a responsibility I carried quietly. I remembered the early mornings, the long training sessions, and the lessons that stayed with me long after I left. The most important lesson was simple. Stay calm when others lose control. Listen before reacting. Let your actions speak louder than your words. Those lessons were exactly why I handled Evelyn the way I did. I didn't need to tell her who I was. I didn't need to use my past to win an argument. But now, standing in front of the sheriff, that past was no longer something I could keep separate. Daniel looked at Evelyn's documents and started reviewing them again. This time, he wasn't just looking at the complaint. He was looking at the entire situation. "So let me understand this," he said. "You contacted law enforcement because of an HOA dispute." Evelyn quickly responded. "It's more than that. He has refused to follow community rules." Daniel glanced at the paperwork. "Are these rules connected to any legal violation?" Evelyn hesitated. That pause said more than an answer could. "The HOA has standards," she said. "Standards are not the same as laws," Daniel replied calmly. The difference was clear. Evelyn had expected the sheriff to validate her authority. Instead, he was separating what she wanted people to believe from what was actually true. He asked me about the situation, and I explained everything without exaggeration. I showed him the notices, the emails, and the records I had kept. I didn't need to mention my service history. The evidence already showed the problem. Daniel reviewed everything carefully. Then he looked at Evelyn again. "Ma'am, this appears to be a private HOA matter, not a criminal issue." The confidence on her face started disappearing. The same person who had told me to call the cops was now realizing that the person she called would not automatically take her side. She thought she was bringing authority to my doorstep. Instead, she brought someone who understood exactly what kind of person she was standing in front of. The moment Daniel Crawford recognized me, I saw the entire situation change. Not because my past gave me some special privilege, but because the sheriff understood something Evelyn Harrington never did. A person's character is not defined by the position they hold today. It is defined by the choices they make when nobody is watching. Evelyn had spent weeks trying to make me look like a difficult homeowner. She wanted people to see someone refusing to follow rules. But standing there in front of the sheriff, the story she created began falling apart. Daniel continued reviewing the documents while Evelyn stood beside him, waiting for the outcome she expected. She still believed the conversation would end with me apologizing. She still believed the HOA had the final authority. But Daniel asked questions she wasn't prepared to answer. "Who created these restrictions?" he asked. "The HOA board approved them," Evelyn replied quickly. "And where is the legal authority that allows the HOA to enforce them?" Daniel asked. The confidence disappeared from her voice for a moment. She looked through her papers, searching for the answer she had never needed before. Most people had simply accepted what she said. Nobody had forced her to explain the foundation behind her decisions. But now she had to. I watched quietly as Daniel examined the notices, the emails, and the timeline I had prepared. He didn't rush. He didn't take sides. He did exactly what a good law enforcement officer should do. He looked at the facts. After several minutes, he handed the documents back to me. "Jackson, from what I'm seeing here, this is not a criminal matter," he said. "This appears to be a disagreement over HOA authority." Evelyn immediately tried to respond. "But he has been ignoring community standards." Daniel looked at her calmly. "A community standard does not automatically become a law." That sentence carried more weight than any argument I could have made, because it exposed the mistake Evelyn had made from the beginning. She believed sounding official was the same as being official. She believed confidence could replace proof. But real authority requires responsibility. While Daniel continued speaking with Evelyn, some of my neighbors slowly came outside. They had been watching from a distance, unsure what would happen. Many of them knew there was something wrong with how Evelyn handled disagreements, but they had never seen anyone challenge her directly. Now they were seeing it happen. One neighbor quietly approached me afterward and said, "I always wondered if someone would finally question her." I simply nodded. I understood why people stayed silent. Most people do not want conflict with someone who controls meetings, notices, and community decisions. But silence only works until someone decides the truth matters more than convenience. Before leaving, Daniel spoke with Evelyn one more time. He explained that any future disputes should be handled through proper HOA procedures, not by using law enforcement as a way to pressure residents. Evelyn listened, but she no longer looked like the person who arrived at my driveway with complete confidence. The authority she believed she had was not real. It was only an image she created. As Daniel walked back to his vehicle, he stopped beside me. "I have to say, Jackson," he said quietly, "I never expected to see you standing in the middle of an HOA dispute." I smiled slightly. Neither did I. My years in the SEAL teams prepared me for many challenges, but I never imagined one of my hardest tests would be proving that respect cannot be forced. It has to be earned. And that was something Evelyn was finally learning. The most interesting part of watching Evelyn Harrington lose control was that nobody had to defeat her. She defeated herself the moment she believed her position was more powerful than the truth. For weeks, she had built her confidence around one idea. She believed that being the HOA president meant people had to listen. She believed that official-looking letters, firm words, and the threat of consequences were enough to make anyone step back. But standing in front of Sheriff Daniel Crawford, she finally discovered the difference between influence and authority. After Daniel left my driveway that day, things around Pine Valley Estates started changing. The conversation spread quickly, not because I told people what happened, but because people had witnessed it themselves. They saw Evelyn call law enforcement expecting me to be the problem. They saw the sheriff arrive, review the facts, and refuse to treat an HOA complaint like a criminal matter. For the first time, many residents started asking questions they had avoided for years. They started looking closer at the decisions Evelyn had made and the way she handled disagreements. I wasn't surprised by what happened next. Once people feel comfortable enough to speak, the truth usually comes out faster than anyone expects. Several neighbors shared stories about similar experiences. They talked about warnings that felt unnecessary. They talked about rules that appeared without clear explanations. They talked about meetings where concerns were dismissed before anyone had a chance to explain themselves. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Evelyn wasn't simply enforcing standards. She had created an environment where people were afraid to challenge her. But fear is not respect, and control is not leadership. A few weeks later, the HOA held a community meeting. I walked into that room knowing exactly what I wanted to say, but I also knew what I didn't want to do. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to embarrass Evelyn. I didn't want people to respect me because of my past. My years with the SEAL teams were part of my story, but they were never meant to be a weapon. I wanted the same thing I had wanted from the beginning. I wanted fairness. The meeting started with Evelyn explaining her decisions. She used the same confident tone she always used. She talked about protecting the community and maintaining standards. But this time, people weren't just listening. They were asking questions. One resident asked why law enforcement had been involved in a private HOA disagreement. Another asked where certain rules came from. For the first time, Evelyn had to answer instead of simply making statements. That was the moment the dynamic changed. Leadership requires accountability. When someone refuses to explain their decisions, people eventually stop seeing them as a leader. They start seeing the control behind the words. By the end of the meeting, the board agreed to review several of the complaints that had been raised. Some policies were reconsidered. Some notices were withdrawn. More importantly, residents felt comfortable speaking again. They no longer believed one person's confidence could override everyone else's concerns. Later that evening, I stood outside my house watching the sunset over Pine Valley Estates. The neighborhood looked exactly the same, but the feeling was different. There was a sense that people had remembered something important. Respect cannot be demanded. It cannot be created by a title or a clipboard. It is earned through honesty, responsibility, and the way you treat others. Evelyn called the cops because she thought she was bringing power to my doorstep. Instead, she brought someone who reminded everyone what real integrity looked like. Looking back now, I realized the biggest victory was never proving Evelyn Harrington wrong. The biggest victory was watching people remember that their voices mattered. For a long time, Pine Valley Estates had slowly become a place where residents measured their words carefully because they were afraid of creating problems with the HOA. But after everything that happened, people started speaking again. They started asking questions. They started expecting answers. And that change meant more to me than any apology Evelyn could have given. I often think about the day she stood in my driveway and told me to call the cops. She believed those words would intimidate me. She believed the arrival of law enforcement would finally force me to accept her version of the story. But she misunderstood something important about people who have faced real challenges. Fear is not something you eliminate by pretending problems don't exist. You overcome it by staying calm and trusting what is right. My years with the SEAL teams taught me many lessons, but one of the most valuable was this: preparation matters. You don't wait for a difficult moment to decide who you are. You build your character long before that moment arrives. That was why I never needed to announce my past. I didn't need Evelyn to know where I had served or what I had done. I didn't need my military background to win an argument about an HOA rule. The truth was already enough. The documents were enough. The facts were enough. Sheriff Daniel Crawford's recognition of me was never what solved the problem. It simply revealed something that had always been there. Behind the quiet homeowner Evelyn underestimated was someone who understood discipline, responsibility, and respect. But those qualities didn't come from a title. They came from years of learning that real strength is shown through actions, not words. After the HOA reviewed the complaints, Pine Valley Estates slowly returned to what it should have been. A community, not a place where people worried about every decision they made. Not a place where one person's opinion controlled everyone else's daily life. Residents became more involved. Conversations became more honest. People stopped accepting every notice without asking questions. And Evelyn's influence changed because the foundation of it was gone. She no longer had the ability to make people believe something simply because she said it confidently. She had to answer for her decisions like everyone else. I still live the same quiet life I wanted when I moved there. I take care of my home. I spend time with my family. I enjoy peaceful mornings without needing anyone's approval. Sometimes I still walk through the neighborhood and think about how close everything came to becoming something much worse. A simple disagreement could have turned into a fight if I had allowed anger to control my actions. But patience gave me something anger never could. It gave the truth time to appear. That is what I hope people remember from my story. Power is not always held by the loudest person in the room. Authority is not created by a title, and respect cannot be demanded from others. It has to be earned. Evelyn called the cops because she thought she was exposing me. She thought she was proving I was someone who needed to be controlled. Instead, she revealed the truth about herself. The sheriff didn't recognize me because of fame or status. He recognized the values I carried with me. And that handshake at the end wasn't about my past. It was about knowing that integrity still matters. Sometimes the person everyone underestimates is the person who has been quietly standing on the right side all along.